Can anyone guess when that photo was taken? Khan Turk?
Last week?
Last
3 days ago.
Yes, apparently. Somebody from Braemar team forwarded that on to me. So it started already. You know, you'd have got a bumpy ride if you're underneath that little lot. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Ken Marsden, been touring for a number of years, but not actively within the Eagle Ski Club. But my day job is as a system design engineer and TV and radio broadcasting, which I kind of bring my interest in professional background in electronics and engineering. And that's kind of what I'm going to bring to bear in this tonight when we start looking at transceivers in a little more detail. And we looked at what happens to an avalanche victim. And sort of the first part of it is they're in a car crash and they can suffer life-threatening or life-terminating traumatic injury. And then people start to asphyxiate and then they get very, very cold. So by the time you get down to this stage, someone who's still alive is a very medically complex casualty. I actually found this, an article that was written by Declan, 2017, I think it was. The graph in a little more detail. The first set of samples is from Switzerland. The second set of samples left shifted is from Canada. So it kind of looks like in Canada, you know, you die quicker than you would in Switzerland or the European Alps. Sort of the only trick question of the night, really. In terms of companion rescue, we're wanting to get people out of the snow and start that medical treatment in this point here. So whether you're in Canada or Switzerland, what difference does it make to your companion rescue response? You know, Switzerland, it looks like people start dying after about 30 minutes. Canada, it looks like they start dying in less than 10 minutes. So what difference does that make to your companion rescue response, depending on whether you're in Canada or Switzerland? Anyone like to hazard a guess?
I suppose speed.
Yeah, I don't think it makes a difference. You know, somebody's buried, you've got to get them out. The sooner you get them out, the better. Okay. You know, I think, you know, this might tell the medics something in the hospital, depending on how long you've been buried in Switzerland or Canada and how deeply you've been buried. But for the purposes of us on the hill, the sooner you get them out, the greater the life chances. And we started talking about the object of an avalanche rescue is to maximize life chances. And rather than define avalanche as snow falling off a mountain, we said it's a medical emergency. You know, it's a 999, it's a 112. And then we looked at how not to do a transceiver search. This is a download from a GPS of someone making a bit of a pig's ear of it. And then I introduced ICAR Avalanche Recommendation 009, which has sort of changed slightly over the years from when I first looked at it. But it breaks down a companion rescue search, or really any avalanche search, into 5 distinct stages. And the first stage is a clue search. You know, you see somebody avalanched or you come across an avalanche tip and you're looking for clues and you're using your eyes and ears, and the clues might be pretty obvious. You know, rucksacks lying on the surface, might be more subtle. You know, hats, gloves, boots, skis, poles, or you might see the body part sticking out the snow, the arm, the leg, in which case, who needs transceivers? You just go get them. But let's assume that somebody's buried or you just can't see them from your vantage point. And then the next thing to do is a signal search. And the signal is really defined as anything electronic, visual, or oral. So during this signal search, you're still using your transceiver to pick up an electronic signal, but you're still using your eyes and your ears as well, because as you get closer, you might see that body part. And don't forget the glove sticking out of the snow, pull on the glove, there might be some fingers inside. And then we go into the core search. So once we've actually picked up a transceiver signal, then we start doing what we call following the flux line. It's sometimes called a curve line search, and we'll look in that in a bit more detail soon. But again, we're still using our eyes and ears, because as you get closer, you might just see that body part sticking out the snow. And then once we get within a few meters of the victim, we're sort of down on our hands and knees, sit right on the surface of the snow with a transceiver. And this is the fine search, or what we call a straight line search. And again, we'll break that down in a wee while. Again, we're still using our eyes, because you might just see the fingertips or the tip of the boot or something just as you disturb the snow. So all the while, even though we're using the electronic toys, which is the fun part, don't forget, use your eyes and your ears. And the purpose of the fine search is to decide where to put the probe. And it's once the probe is in and you get a strike, that's when you found the victim. And of course, while you're doing your pinpoint search, the digging team can be getting ready to start to dig. So let's just sort of take a step back. The essential tools of the trade. When I sort of talk about avalanche, I think language and the way we speak about it and the words we use are important. So the first thing is the transceiver, which is to locate and be located. Now, transceivers find transceivers. And the reason that we find the body or the victim is because the transceiver is attached to the victim. And we all know about wearing a transceiver under a layer of clothing and all the rest of it. And then the next thing, the tool we use is the probe, which we use to pinpoint and mark where the victim is. And then we dig him out with a shovel. So whenever we talk about the tools of the trade, I always talk about transceiver, probe, shovel, because that is the order we use them. Okay. I call it a Holy Trinity, 3 legs of the stool. And on top of it all is the instruction book. We all buy electronic equipment these days. The first thing we throw in the bin is the instruction book, and then we get the toy out of the box, charge it up, switch it on, and start making phone calls on Facebook and taking photographs and all the rest of it. But the instruction books that come with modern devices, they're all very good. They're all basically saying the same thing, maybe slightly different ways, but they're well worth reading. I forgot I can do a pointer on this, can't I? Pen. There we go. So when we start thinking about avalanche transceivers, we start getting into some abstract concepts about flux lines, which has everyone sort of heard the idea about flux lines and transceivers? Yeah. Oddly enough, as we're mountaineers, we know quite a lot about flux lines because we used to navigate with a map and compass, and we know that the planet Earth has its own magnetic field. And we, some sort of magnetic phenomena comes out of one end and goes in the other. Now, the trick with avalanche transceivers is that we flip north and south pole 457,000 times a second, which is where you get this term 457 kilohertz from, which you've probably seen written on your devices. So I think the Earth switches its north and south pole once every so many tens of thousands of years. We can get that from geological records. Well, transceivers do it a little bit faster, 457,000 times a second. And that's essentially what we're doing. We're just using a magnet that flips backwards and forwards. Just to take the analogy a little bit further, navigating before the days of GPS. So you take your compass out of your bag and the needle immediately points north. So you've got this idea of flux line that's maybe some sort of distinct line, but it's not really. It's a magnetic field. Okay, so whenever you take your compass out of the bag, it aligns itself with that magnetic field. You don't have to take a few steps to the left or right to find a flux line so your compass lines up. Just to take the analogy a little bit further, we know all about contours, and anyone can look at this map and look at the contours and we can understand what the shape of the ground is. What a contour does is it joins points of the same height above sea level. And we know that, even though these are sort of distinct, as it were, spot heights or the same altitude above sea level, the ground under our feet is not stepped like that. We know that the ground, probably follows a more even profile like that. And it's the same with our flux lines, that flux lines basically just join points of the same magnetic field strength. Now, we can all look at contours on a map and we can work out what the shape of the ground would be. To take the analogy a little further, we cannot, as human beings, sense air pressure and changes in air pressure. But what we can do is we can look at a synoptic chart as mountaineers, and we can look at the isobars, and isobars are just joining points of the same atmospheric pressure. And looking at that synoptic chart, we can sort of see, you know, which is a high pressure, which is low pressure, a ridge and a trough and all that, and we can work out, you know, what the weather's going to do and how it's going to impact our activities. And that's from something that we cannot sense as human beings, but what we can do is look at a bunch of lines on a piece of paper. And so it is with magnetic flux lines. You know, we can't sense a magnetic field, but we've got ways of measuring it using electronic instruments, and we can plot them out. So the shape of the field that is radiated by your transceiver is like a three-dimensional donut. Okay, there's the hole in the middle, or a bagel. Like I say, it's not distinct lines, it's just a sort of homogeneous field. So these are not distinct steps, but think of it as like the contours, and in between the ground is fairly even. When you look at the marketing blurb for your transceivers, you know, they're all made by different manufacturers. They're all trying to tell you that their product is the best. And they start using some confusing terms. So some things you might have seen in the marketing blurb is induction line search, or a curved line search, or a flux line search. It's all the same thing for our purposes. Okay. Transceivers all work the same way. Bit like car engines, they all work the same way. It's just that over the years we've made some technological improvements, but fundamentally, and we'll look at it in a wee while, they all work the same way. In fact, we'll look at it now. So when we looked at the little video last time, we saw our French friend here just starting to go off on his signal search. And although it didn't show it up very well on the video, what he was doing was taking his transceiver and he was going to manipulate it somewhere around his head through its axes. So hopefully I can show you what he was doing. If I do a new share. Right, can everyone see? What we're looking at here is the pulses from this Avalanche transceiver, and they're being picked up by another Avalanche transceiver. So you can think of this as the victim. And you'll see that as I move it around my head, I can make it bigger. I can make it smaller. In fact, I've made it disappear. And I can make it reappear. Now, the other transceiver is just a few yards away from me in the kitchen here. So I hope you can just take it on trust that I'm not moving anywhere. All I'm doing is changing the orientation of the transceiver next to my ear. Now, when we talked about the signal search last time, we said you do this around your ear because by doing that, it keeps your eyes and your ears up so you can continue that visual and oral search as you're going across the avalanche tip. But by manipulating the transceiver around your ears through its three axes, what you're doing is you're trying to align your transceiver and the victim's transceiver so that you get maximum coupling between the antennas, to use a technical term. So if they're aligned like that side by side, that's good, we get a strong signal. If they're aligned above each other like that, we get a strong signal. If they're at right angles like that, or right angles like that, we get a much weaker signal. But of course, you don't know what the orientation of the buried victim is. You know, they're not all lying flat on their backs, which is why, as we're doing our signal search, we're manipulating the transceiver through its axes so that hopefully we pick up that signal as soon as possible at the greatest distance from the victim. And then once you've got that signal, transceiver flat in your hand, and we're into what we call the induction line search or the curved line search, because now you've picked up the signal and you can start to follow the arrow, and then that homes you in on the buried victim, and that is your course search. So there's the signal search, and we're looking for that signal. Like I say, if I'm very careful, I can almost make it disappear. There we go. It's disappeared, and I can make it come back much bigger. Okay, so anyone got any questions on that bit so far? Some of you might have seen this trick before if you were in Osmodely several years ago. Or any questions or comments before I go on to the next bit? Good. Okay, let's just see what the next part is.
Could I just ask a quick question?
Please do.
So that was just a few meters away, and that was the thing there. So if you were 20 meters away, it's the same thing still happens.
It's exactly the same thing. Yeah. The way I caveat this in these little demonstrations I'm doing tonight, I've done this a lot, is I deliberately manipulate a few settings to demonstrate what I'm trying to show you. We'll come on to a thing called search strip width in a minute. So I'll just get the trace back up. Here we go, so I can see it. So we'll talk about search strip width next. And that is a parameter that you have to find from your transceiver. It'll be written on it. It'll be the instruction book. The old pulse barrier Vox, it's 50 meters. And so that is kind of like 50 meters is about the maximum guaranteed distance it'll work over. But as we've just seen, there's a number of reasons why it won't work over that distance, orientation being one of them, which is why we have to manipulate it around our ears. Okay. Newer transceivers, they've improved the electronics and the sensitivity, so they'll work over 70 meters. Okay. So that does, I think, bring us neatly into search strip width. So let's just have a little look deeper inside the transceiver. So inside your transceiver, not this one, a modern transceiver has 3 antennas, which is why they're called 3 antenna transceivers or 3 axes. And the long one on the x-axis, which is typically down the length of the device, that's the one that you transmit from. There are some transceivers that do some clever tricks and in send mode, and we can talk about those another night if I'm invited back to speak. But for this conversation, they all transmit from this long axis antenna here.
Webinar on transceivers.
Oh no.
Yeah. Someone's not on mute.
I'll come and I'll just come. I'll just.
I think it's Paul Cooper, I think.
Right. And it's this x-axis antenna which is used in the signal search mode. So you've got an antenna there that's transmitting, an antenna there that's transceiving, and what we're trying to do is get them aligned.
I'll come up in a minute.
With each other. Okay. When we start looking in a bit more detail at the next phase of the search, there's our x-axis antenna. When we get into the course search,
Dina, and then I'll tell me when you're finished.
Someone's fed it with me already. So we use our x-axis antenna in the signal search, and then once the transceiver said, right, I'm getting a signal from that, it then brings in this y-axis antenna, which is what enables it to analyze the transmitted signal in 2 dimensions. And so it's that antenna along with that antenna which allows it to point an arrow and say, go this way. Okay, and it's then that it's following the flux line, and you're into what we call the curved line search, because you follow a curved line quite often. And then the final antenna is a z-axis antenna, and this is the one that kicks in once you get within a few meters of the victim. It's only short because it's through the body of the antenna there. It's pointing down that way, sorry, down that way through the transceiver. So it's only short, so it's not very sensitive. But it's that antenna, along with the other 2, that enables you to do the fine search and decide where to put the probe. Okay, so that's where 3 antenna transceivers are really good. Peeps several years ago bought out a 4 antenna transceiver again, marketing blurb, but the fourth antenna was actually a GPS antenna, so they were sort of cheating a little bit. So we talked a bit about search strip width a few weeks ago, and this was the zigzag path that was followed by our French friend doing his signal search for the buried victim. And they very cleverly just called that the search strip width. They didn't put a distance on it. So for the Barryvox S, that's 70 meters. For the old Pulse Barryvox, that's 50 meters. For other transceivers, some older types, it's only 30 meters. So you need to look at your device and figure out what it is for your device. And we found that by doing that, we get these nice overlaps and there's no gaps in the search. So nothing is going to fall through the gaps, and he's kind of like covering everything. What happens though if something compromises either the received signal or the transmitted signal? And what happens is that we reduce the search strip width of the device. And so what's happening here is we're starting to get some gaps where we're not going to pick up the buried victim. So we might actually ski right past them and not pick up their signal. So there's two things that cause that to happen, and it's probably pretty well documented now. But right, let's just turn this down a little bit. So what I've done is I've just got the transceiver down on the bench here next to me, and there's a Kit Kat with a nice silvery wrapper in it. And I'm hoping that if I put the Kit Kat next to that transceiver, you'll see it's reduced the size of the signal. Now that means that you've got to get closer to that transceiver to pick up its signal. And so if you're following your zigzag path, that might slip through the cracks. So this is what happens if you have a metallic device next to your transceiver. So we've got some nice pulses. If I take my Kit Kat and put it next to it, you'll see that the size of the pulses has just reduced. So the size of the signal that the victim is transmitting has been reduced. So that is, you know, how many of us put sweetie wrappers in our chest pocket, you know, food on the go? Anything else that might be in there that's metallic, like your camera, your mobile phone, which is switched off, anything metallic, including things you might not think of, such as a lot of food packaging now has got foil in it, you know, packets of crisps, you know, your sweetie bars, Tunnocks caramel wafers do this an absolute treat. I normally demo with those. So that reduces the transmitted signal, which means you have to get closer in order to pick it up. So that's reduced the search strip width. Okay, has anyone got any questions or comments on that before I move on?
How far away should you leave your sweeties then, if it causes a problem?
It is written on the back of your transceiver. I forget what it says now on mine, but basically I just keep all that stuff in the top of my rucksack. Okay. Or, you know, if my transceiver's on the chest, I might just keep, you know, the chocky bar in my trouser pocket. But, you know, don't forget, if you get avalanched, you can end up being buried in all sorts of contorted positions. So you think that, you know, your metallic objects, your sweetie wrappers, your car keys, whatever it is kind of safe in, say, like a trouser pocket, a cargo pocket on the front of your trousers. And then you get avalanched and you end up with your thigh up against your chest. And that could be putting that metallic object right next to your transceiver. So what we see is these nice distinct pulses, and this is what the searching transceiver is looking for, a nice clean signal. Right, let's see what happens next. So beautiful. What I've done is I've put a head torch next to my searching transceiver. And what it's done is it's increased the electronic noise and it's obliterated that weak signal. Okay. So that is you doing a search potentially with your mobile phone switched on or some other electronic device that is too close to your searching transceiver. Now, if I just move that, there you go. I've just changed the orientation of the device and you can see that the pulses are picking up now. But that effectively is you have to get much, much closer to the transceiver before you start picking up the signal. So that is the effect of your electronic devices interfering with a searching transceiver.
Do heart rate monitor straps affect the transceiver?
So I beg your pardon, do heart rate monitor straps affect the transceiver? Right, is this the sort of thing that you wear on your wrist?
No, I assume these are the ones you wear on your chest.
All right, okay. Yeah, potentially it's something. I imagine I'm not familiar with these devices, but you know, if you've got something strapped to your chest next to your transceiver, it's probably got metallic parts in it, so it's potentially compromising the performance of your transceiver. Quite right to ask these questions. What I'm doing here, you know, like I say, I know how to generate these effects. I mean, nobody in their right mind will put a head torch within a fraction of an inch of an avalanche transceiver, but I'm just doing this in my kitchen, you know, but it's showing the effect. Now, when this sort of first came out, there was a paper written by a couple of guys from Mammoth, and they did all this under laboratory conditions, you know, electronic, you know, they eliminated all external sources of electronic noise and all the rest of it. And they made comparisons between different electronic devices, different makes and manufacturers of mobile phones, GoPro cameras, you name it. But to me, it's quite simple. Just keep all your electronics and all your metallics well away from your transceiver and preferably turn your electronics off. You know, you turn a mobile phone on to make the emergency call. You don't turn 5 mobile phones off to start a transceiver search. So that's what happens if an electronic device or a metallic device interferes with a transceiver. You start getting these gaps because the search strip width is reduced and you potentially could miss the victim and ski right past them. So now we sort of start thinking about some of the apparently dumb things that transceivers do. They cost an awful lot of money, and sometimes you go, hold on a minute, why is it doing that when it costs 300 quid? Surely things should be better than that. So let's go back to contours again, and just a little sort of thought experiment. Let's just say you are parachuted or helicoptered or somehow land on a hillside, and it's quite murky and claggy or dark. Your visibility is maybe impaired, blindfold or something like that. And your task is to decide which way's up and which way's down. Now, could you tell just from looking at these contours which way's up and which way's down? Not too much of a trick question. Anyone like to hazard a guess?
No.
No, you can't tell from those contours. So if you're just stood there, what's one way that you could physically find out which way's up and which way's down? What would you do, given that you couldn't actually see the lie of the land for whatever reason? How would you determine which way's up and which way's down?
Start walking.
Start walking. You would move, exactly. And you know, if you there we go, how do you find out? So you would move around and you figure, right, okay, it seems to be going a bit easier one way, so that's probably down, a bit harder the other way, so that's probably up, and neither easy nor difficult, so that's maybe along. And you would work out which way is up and down. Now, over here, instead of we've got contours here, we've got flux lines. And you might have done this when you've been practicing your transceiver searches, that you put a transceiver sort of, put my hand, 10 or 20 yards away from you, and you go, right, there it is. And you walk away and you turn on your transceiver, and let's just say it's Pulse Barry-Vox, which is kind of standard workhorse these days. And it points exactly the opposite direction from where you've put your victim's transceiver. Now you go, hold on a minute, these things cost 300 quid and it's pointing exactly the wrong direction. So anyone like to kind of has to guess what the poor computer's doing there?
It's getting the other end of the flux line.
Yeah, all it's doing is it's aligning itself with a flux line. It's saying, right, I've got a flux line, there's a signal, but it's got to point one way or the other, and it's kind of got a 50-50 chance of getting it right. It's like you being landed blindfold. Okay, it hasn't got eyes. It doesn't know that you put a victim's transceiver 20 yards over here. All it knows is flux lines and pulses. So it sort of says, well, okay, it's that way. So what would you need to do to make it change its mind and point the right direction?
You walk around.
Yeah, you got to move. And then it'll say, right, the signal's either getting stronger or weaker, and then the arrow will swivel around and it'll point in the right direction. So, if you're, say, like a real avalanche, you stand at the edge of the tip, you turn it on, it's pointing the opposite direction away from where you think the victim is, because you've got eyes and you've seen the victim go. Well, start your search, walk towards the victim. After a few meters, this will go, okay, you were right, I was wrong, and it'll point the right direction and take you in on the curved line search. We start thinking about standards now. I've lost count of how many people are on the call, but I can almost guarantee that there's probably no two people on this call got the same make and model of mobile phone. And yet I can guarantee that I could phone any of you from my Samsung Android phone, which is several years old. I can guarantee I'd be able to text message you. I can guarantee I'd be able to send you an email. And that is because all the mobile phones comply to internationally agreed standards. Okay. Now, the standards for mobile phones and other complex electronic devices are very thick and detailed. They're documents that run to thousands of pages. ETSI EN 300-718 is the European Telecommunications Standards Institute. EN, I think, is European norm, and then they've just got to give it a number. And that is the international standard to which all avalanche transceivers sold on the market must comply with. And it's not a very big document, and it says some things in it which I think we would all understand. It says that a decent set of batteries must last 200 hours. It says things like, if you drop it on a hard surface from a given height, it has to still work. Obvious reasons for that. It then starts getting a little more complicated, and it says that the pulses that are transmitted must be around about 100 milliseconds, 0.1 of a second, but there's a bit of give and take in that. And it says that they have to repeat roughly once every second. Again, there's a little bit of give and take in that. So it's transmitting only for about 10% of the time, and for 90% of the time, it's not actually doing anything. And if I got the oscilloscope up again, we could take some measurements to demonstrate that. So this has some implications for the, I'll go back, beg your pardon, go up. Here we go. When we start thinking about the fine search and deciding where to put the probe, you've got to realize that for 90% of the time, the victim's transceiver is not doing anything. It's not transmitting. It's only transmitting once per second. So this is why your fine search needs to be quite slow and methodical, because otherwise you can move your transceiver quite a long way within the space of less than a second, but the victim hasn't transmitted anything. So your transceiver that you're searching with doesn't have any data or information to chew on. So this is why the find search needs to be reasonably slow and methodical. And a typical search would go like that. And note, the orientation of the transceiver doesn't change. It points the same way. And it doesn't matter whether you come in from, you know, over here or down here or across here or around here. It doesn't matter, you know, which way the transceiver's pointing when I get close to the victim and start that find search. When I do the find search, the transceiver stays in exactly the same orientation. And the closer to the surface of the snow you have it, the more accurate it's going to be. And you know, the closer you'll be to the victim when you start doing your probing and your pinpoint searching. Okay. And this is a typical pattern that you'll get. And modern transceivers now, again, the Pulse Vox S, I think the graphics on it are very good. You know, it tells you forwards, backwards, left, right, make some horrible squawking noises, and then it says, put the probe here. And, you know, it's pretty accurate. It's good. Okay. So just to sort of go back, signal search, we're trying to get the transceivers aligned so that we pick up the signal from as far away as possible. Curved line search, the course search, we keep the transceiver horizontal in front of us so we can see the screen, and we follow the arrow, and we might go in a curved path like that depending on where we're coming in from. And then the find search, right down on the surface of the snow with the transceiver. Again, you might just see those little fingertips poking up above the snow, and it's forwards, backwards, left, right, follow the instructions on the transceiver if it's a modern one, and then stick your probe in, do your spiral probing until you get a strike. Okay, any questions or comments so far? I don't know if there's anything else in the chat. I think they transmit on Bluetooth. Transmitter rates straps affect the transceiver. Yeah, I'll just say it's electronic. I would keep it well away. So looking at this again, and when we start thinking about multiple victims, so we transmit a pulse, and then say we've got another 1 or 2 buried victims. One of the things that the transceiver looks at is the amplitude or the size of the pulse. And so if we've got pulses that are 3 different sizes, it's quite easy for the transceiver to work out which one's which. They can do some other tricks as well by analyzing the width of the pulses and the duration between pulses. They can get quite clever like that. But let's just say we are sort of got a victim, and we're kind of between 2 victims about the same distance. And what happens, the poor transceiver gets a signal from victim 1, another one from victim 2, which is about the same amplitude or the same strength of signal. And it can get quite confusing for the poor device. So I don't know if people have tried doing multi-burial searches with their transceivers, but sometimes it can take you back to where you started from. So let's just have another look at this. We've got a transceiver blipping away. Let's fire up another one. There we go. So it's pretty obvious which one's which. You know, we've got quite a large signal here and a smaller signal there. A bit like watching paint dry, but what you'll see is sometimes they get further apart and sometimes they get closer together, and sometimes they merge. So have you ever done a bit of transceiver practice and sometimes your device said stand still? Does anyone want to stick their hand up to that one? It's done that to me loads of times.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the sort of thing that's happening. I'll come back to you in a minute, Andy. Is that we're getting the two signals merging and transceivers saying, hold on a minute, I can't distinguish one from the other properly. So just wait a minute till they separate out, and then I can start telling you which way to go. Okay. Andy Perkins, you had your hand up. Sorry.
It was only just to say that I have had the instructions stand still, Ken. That's all. Keep going, mate. It's all good.
Yeah. So you're probably of a vintage, Andy. Don't wish to insult you, but you can probably remember the good old days when you would do a transceiver search with this sort of thing. Yeah, a good old fashioned analog single antenna transceiver.
Not quite as old as that one, but F1 focuses, yes.
Yeah, maybe a 2 antenna BCA tracker. And you know, you'd be doing your search, and you know, you might sort of hear that you can hear the two pulses distinctly, and then you'll find that somehow there's a funny sound, and it's like they're merged together, and you would think, hold on a minute, I just need to stop until I can hear the two distinct pulses again, and then I can carry on with my old-fashioned single antenna search. Yeah. So your modern device is only doing what you would have done 20 or 30 years ago with a much older device. Yeah. So let's keep that running and see what else we come up with. Let's see if we get some more funny effects. Yeah. Oh, so look what's happened there. We've got two signals that have clashed together and have produced a very large signal. So to your searching transceiver, that looks like one victim that's very, very close. And then it separates out to two victims that are about the same distance away. So there's a funny effect. We can get the opposite effect where the two signals clash and obliterate each other. Yeah, we're going to get it. No. But anyway, I don't think it's going to do it for us. But you can see here, you know, funny stuff happens and your transceiver says, just hold on a minute. I need to stop and think and let the two victims sort themselves out. Hopefully you can understand by looking at this that two victims can cause problems. 3, 4, 5 victims can cause even more problems and even more clashes. Yeah, and it can be very difficult for your poor transceiver to figure out which is which and who's who and which way to go. Okay, now there are ways of overriding that, but that's a topic for another night. Okay, let's go back to the slide. Share that one. So when we start thinking about multiple burials, as part of the spec, what's happened over the years is that the pulses have got narrower and narrower, and the time between them has increased. This is good because it saves batteries, which makes them last longer. It also means that if the pulses are narrower and the repetition rate between pulses is increased, then we can get sort of more victims in there, but we get less overlap, and the more we can search for. But again, you've already seen that with two transceivers, we get all these clashes. So, you know, basically, don't get avalanche, don't get buried. If you get buried, make sure you're the only one. Just a little quote, 18% of accidents with more than one completely buried person. I don't know if that stat is still valid. That's 10 years old, that. So these multiple burials do happen. So the question that I promised I would answer is, the best transceiver is, would anyone like to tell me which is the best transceiver?
The one you know how to use.
The one you practice with, spot on. Absolutely. Yeah. And again, like your life depends on it, and then behave as if it doesn't work is the final parting shot. Yeah. So I would recommend a 3, if you don't have a 3 antenna transceiver, I certainly recommend that. It definitely makes doing the fine search a lot easier. Whatever works for you in terms of the graphics and the way it displays things, but it's practice that separates people out, really. So thank you very much for your time, folks. I always enjoy doing these talks. Does anyone get any other questions or comments? It's kind of open house now. Is that still the same chat? It was doing the session at Osmotherley. After that, we changed the trackers to Barryvox. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Ken, just a comment.
Yes.
I didn't realize that your Tunnux caramel wafer wrapper would have such an effect.
Yeah.
And I was shopping for a new down jacket the other day, and there are jackets that have heat reflecting technology, silver reflectors on the inside.
That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
I'm glad I didn't buy one.
Yeah.
So I think Columbia make a down jacket with that sort of technology.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, buy one, send one up to me, and I'll test it out.
Okay.
I mean, another thing, we got new radios for Mountain Rescue a couple of years ago, and a lot of people like to carry their radios in a chest harness, or as our Zimbabwean deputy called them, a stab vest. And we looked at some, and they were being marketed as ski. Was it? I can't remember what the marketing blurb was. It didn't say ski patrol, but it said something that suggested ski patrol. But basically, it had a pouch for a radio, and then it had another pouch next to it. And what it was really for was so you could have your mobile phone and your radio on your chest. And you sort of thought, well, okay, that's great, but where does your transceiver go? You got two. But I just knew that if we got them from the team, what would happen is people would put the transceiver in one of the pouches and the radio in the other. And, that's just bad news, I think. So we didn't get them. But I can't remember exactly what the words were in the marketing blurb, but it wasn't saying they were used for ski patrol, but that was kind of what it was implying. So you've got to watch these people, but they're like the rest of us. They're trying to make a living. They're trying to sell something. So, yes, Andy.
I'll just switch my video on so that you can see my lovely face. First of all, there was when I was training as a guide, even which is 20 years ago, there was a story of a ski patroller who was killed in avalanche because he had a chest harness on. With a radio, and they were trying to call him on his radio, and he was actually buried. So yeah, I'd agree with the whole chest harness thing, and the whole, I've just saying, Mike Holmes put a question up about, so where do you put the transceiver? Because last week Cathy O'Dowd gave a great presentation on navigating with a phone, and so it's all very well saying switch the electronics off and keep them in your pack, but the fact of the matter is that when I'm working, I have a phone on me, I have a camera on my hip, I have chocolate bars, I have everything. So what do you do? And I must say, in answer to your question, Mike, is I put my transceiver in a secure zip cargo pocket on my pants. And yes, if I get bent in two, then it could be potentially up near my so if I just stand up very briefly and here my just do the screen thing, my transceiver is here and my phone is there and my camera is on my left hip, and so it's about as far away as it can be. And as I understand it, the general perceived wisdom is that I went on a course I've done by the Peeps rep last winter, and he said for transmitting at least 30 centimeters away, the effect is negligible, and for receiving, it's at least 50 centimeters away.
Yeah.
In other words, when you're receiving, you've
Mhm.
got to have your arm outstretched to keep it away,
Yeah.
which is useful as well in searches, and we could talk a lot about that.
Yeah,
So,
which is typically what you would do. I mean, the little bit about using a mobile phone to navigate with. Again, what I would say is that, you know, if you're in a, you know, you're in your party, you're in your group, you know, one of you is navigating with the mobile phone, and you know that, but hopefully the rest of your group, so we're not navigating, so our mobile phones are switched off and they're in the back of the rucksack, and, you know, you as the guide or the group leader, I think, have to proactively manage this, you know. And then it might be that if somebody's avalanched and buried, you sort of say, right, here's my phone, you make the emergency call, I'll start the search. Yeah, that could be a way of doing it. Yeah.
Is the critical issue the fact that the phone is switched on, or that the antenna is on? I mean, because a lot of people use their phones also for maybe photography, or, you know,
They do
things as well.
Yeah. So what's happening is your mobile phone, it's a multifunction device, but basically it's just a box of electronics, and there's lots of transistors in there switching on and off millions of times a second, and that creates electromagnetic interference. Okay. So, you know, I think, you know, I've tried with my phone. I think, yeah, if I've got the camera on, it seems to be worse than if the camera's off. You know, I don't want to go down the route of sort of saying, well, you know, if you, you know, one mode of using your phone is worse than another. You know, the bottom line is just get all that electronics, turn it off, get it out of the way, get it in your rucksack, get all your metallics out of the way, you know, get it in your rucksack or in pockets that are well away from your transceiver. Okay. Some devices are demonstrably worse than others, but I wouldn't like to go down the route when I'm skiing of sort of saying, well, you know, my Samsung phone is okay, but I wouldn't put an Apple phone next to my transceiver. You know, it's just not a game I would play. Does that answer the question, Mike?
Yeah, I suppose it poses a whole bunch of quite tricky questions, doesn't it? When people do want to have a camera and take photos, or, you know, obviously are navigating by mobile devices and would have those switched on, and, you know,
yeah. But again, you know, if I'm in my group, you know, one person is navigating, one person has the phone on or the GPS. You don't need all 5 of you in the group to have your GPS and your phones running, because, you know, might be your batteries run out and you go, right, you know, next person, turn your GPS on, please, and we'll carry on navigating. Yeah. So I think some of it does come down to group management, and it was one of the comments in one of the recent yearbooks that I think a guide, I don't know whether it was a real avalanche incident or whether they were just training and practicing, but, you know, a lot of time was wasted in the group trying to make sure that everyone's electronics was turned off before they started the search.
It was a GPS unit that was switched on, Ken.
Yeah, and as we've seen, yeah, time is critical.
Just to say, presumably, if there's no avalanche risk whatsoever, then it's not a problem.
Well, would you be bothered to wear a transceiver if there's no avalanche risk?
Well, at a particular point in time on a tour.
You know, can you never say never with avalanches? Yeah. If there's no risk, why are you bothering to wear a transceiver, and why would you carry a shovel and probe? You know, it's just part of your standard kit when you're out ski touring.
Could I make a little philosophical point here, Ken?
Yeah, please do.
There's a very good video currently on the Data Avalanche site, which is called something like, it's an American presentation, and the premise of this talk is that avalanche risk management is not chess, it's poker.
Yeah.
And so in answer to, I'm not sure who it was who asked the question there about, when it's safe. And I would say my instant thought was it's never safe. There's never zero risk. But you could take a view and as to when you think the risk is lowest. And we can disappear down that rabbit hole massively, and we haven't got time to do that. But if you think of avalanche risk management in general, how likely is that this slope is going to avalanche, and then what is your response going to be, or how prepared are you for that in a poker sense rather than a chess sense? It's just an interesting way of thinking about it.
Another way that was put to me, Andy, once by a guy from the Swiss Avalanche Institute, he said, think about last time you were driving, you had a near miss in the car, someone came around the corner, you think, wow, that was close. And you can measure that in terms of, feet and inches or time, And he said, think about the last time you went across a slope. And sometimes you'll go across a slope when you go, poof, yeah, that was didn't feel right. And he says, last time you went across a slope, how close were you to being avalanched? And the truth is, you don't really know.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is the poker game. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So you just don't know how close you are to that near miss or close hit.
The question on the kind of the physics and the waveforms and all that kind of stuff, as to why it is that often a transceiver, so if you do a range check going from in range walking away, for the same relative orientations of the two units, typically if you go from in range to out of range, your range is a lot longer
than if you go in the other way.
In range. Is that simply that the receiving unit has got that, it's already distinguishing a pattern and it can pick it up over the background noise, or is there something else in there?
Okay, I would speculate, and I've noticed the same thing myself, that if you're walking away, it's already receiving that signal and it's picking it up as it gets fainter and fainter and fainter. Okay, and it's almost as if it's hanging on to it, and you sort of get so far away, and it might say 60 or 70 meters, and you think, are you really picking it up, or is it just displaying something? And then eventually it'll just give you the zigzag display to say do a signal search, and then you actually have to get much closer. And I just wonder if it's you've got to get that bit closer when you're coming into it for it to say I've definitely got a signal here. And then we can follow it. Problem with these devices is that I've got my electronics background and I can do some little demos, but trying to sort of fully understand what's really going on inside them, I can only I end up starting to guess a little bit. And I did have direct contact with the manufacturers of the Pulse Barry Vox, and they did, to be fair to them, they told me a lot, but I've kind of since lost contact with them.
Well, I guess the parallel for me in the usage sense is if we're talking about doing the XYZ movement,
this thing,
through the initial search, that if think worst case scenario, you then you get a signal, and bring the transceiver down into the direction where you can look at the screen to follow the instructions. If that happens to be the point of least good signal on your axes, that I've always had that question in my mind of, is it worth doing the 3-axis thing, because what I want is a usable signal when I've got the transceiver down here. But then if it'll pick up the signal and hang on to it a bit more when I change orientation.
But if you do the signal search and you're following your zigzag pattern on your search strip width, then eventually you're going to get a good strong signal. I think you might, some fluke, get to a point and you go, oh no, it seems to have disappeared. So you just carry on with your signal search and then eventually you'll get a signal and it'll point and off you go. Yeah. And sort of just kind of remember a little bit, you know, the signal search is fast, and, you know, although we sort of say, you know, search strip width, nobody takes a ruler, nobody takes a protractor. You've kind of got to estimate where your zigs and zags are going to be to make sure that you get that search strip width and everything overlaps. You know, you might decide to err on the side of caution, and instead of 50 or 70 meters between your zigs and your zags, you might make it a little bit less, just to make sure that, you know, you're not opening out too much and potentially bringing some cracks into your search. Yeah, does that make sense? But I think the thing is, by having this structured approach, which is well documented, it's all in the books, you know, you cannot fail to find the victim, really, if you do it right. Whereas if you do what I showed originally, where the guy was just wandering around randomly, and that was his GPS plot, well, quite clearly someone who hadn't read the book, hadn't practiced, didn't know what they're doing, and hey, guess what happened to the victim?
So where's the future technology? Because this is quite well established. It's been around for 10, 20 years, and we think of the progress of mobile phones and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
We start deconflicting the electromagnetic spectrum such that the fact that everyone is carrying a mobile phone, the fact that most people are carrying a whole 6 packs of tonics, tea cakes and stuff stuck down the jackets, and jackets is now coming out with tin foil on the inside. That starts deconflicting that electromagnetic spectrum and working around these problems, because all the other technologies have come on leaps and bounds. 20 years ago, mobile phones were just coming on the scene, and now look where they are.
Yeah, exactly. So this stuff didn't exist. Unfortunately, to quote Scotland's most famous engineer, you can't change the laws of physics, Jim. You know, I think the latest Barry Vox S, you know, they've done extra work. You know, they can tinker around with filtering, and they're using, you know, lower noise electronic components and things like that, but you're never going to eliminate this problem. Okay, and I was even just reading something on something in the news about the rollout of 5G mobile phone networks in the United States might be put on hold because the Boeing and Airbus say it's going to interfere with their electronic height measuring system that they use, because it's on similar frequencies. And you know, this whole gamut of electromagnetic interference, you know, in my day job in broadcasting, we have to go to great lengths to demonstrate to the regulators that we're not, or that the what we call spurious emissions, where we interfere potentially with other users in other parts of the spectrum, we have to make sure that our interfering signals are at such a low level that we don't interfere with people further away or on different frequencies. But it's a very tricky problem, and you're trying to do all that in something that size that you're flogging for 300 quid, you know. So I'm afraid the mobile phone and the interference problem is not going to go away. It's something that you have to manage. Do smartwatches interfere with it as well? And again, I think it's probably one to be careful of, because, you know, people wear these smartwatches and your Sunto altimeter watches, all that sort of thing on the wrist, and it could be right next to your transceiver while you're searching. So that's one to watch for. Another one that people may not think about, probably not a problem in Scotland, but I think certainly a problem in the Alps. If you're involved in an avalanche incident in a resort, then the machinery in the, you know, the lift machinery, electric motors, transformers, all this sort of heavy machinery, that can interfere with transceivers. So that's one to be careful of. Someone says, watch the left wrist, assuming, yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, one to watch for. Some people are left and right-handed. I know most people wear the watch on the right, on the left hand. I do, but some people do put it on the right. Always says anything electronic, anything metallic, just be careful where it is and what you do with it.